ran away, joined the army, and it kind of set me up for all things property. Took about 40 grand out, and I was like, hang on a minute, I've got a house and I've got all my money back and I'm getting rent.
I'm onto something here.
Yeah.
Why student accommodation?
168,000 population, 22,000 students requiring accommodation.
What kind of top tips would you give to people getting started right now? Welcome to the Progressive Property Success Stories. This is an old segment with a new lease of life, and our intention is to do one of these per month, so you need to keep watching. Now this month we are very excited to start off with our very own Nick Thorpe, PPA mentor. So Nick has been a mentor with the Progressive Property Academy for around about 8 years now, having sourced over 450 properties, built developments up to a GDV of 8 million, having built and exited multiple businesses. He is well versed to be able to help and support you. So welcome Nick, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
So I've done a mini overview, but you tell us a little bit of a background in terms of life before Progressive, life before property. What were you doing, and give a bit of context to the listeners and watchers.
Yeah, great. So Yorkshire boy, Yorkshire man now I suppose, and grew up in kind of pretty rural area, pretty standard upbringing. And then the first kind of career choice, the first chapter of my life was the military. So I kind of ran away, joined the army, and I kind of lived a bit of a boyhood dream. Joined as a soldier, left as a kind of an officer in the army, and I did para-commando training and all the bits and bobs in between.
So a bit of a change into the property world.
Very similar. It kind of set me up for
carnage.
For all things property, really. And that was kind of so 16 years up until kind of late 20s, early 30s, and I kind of left with a dream of buying some houses and living off the rent.
So you actually had that as a plan upon leaving the military?
Yeah, my plan was to do something in business, and I was looking at the standard army officer route of consultancy or security work somewhere. And I think I was offered a couple of jobs, project management, that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, I'll buy a house, and I did it all like no training, nothing. I was like, I'll buy this house and I will live off the rent. Bought it cash. My first house cost me £39,200. Yeah.
Not even a deposit in today's world.
Yeah. And then I kind of, rented it for like £450 a month. And then I got it refinanced and revalued. It was, 70,000. And I took about 40 grand out. And I was like, hang on a minute. I've got a house and I've got all my money back and I'm getting rent.
I'm onto something here.
Yeah.
So that's how you got started. You came out with the vision of buying one, and obviously you built a very successful portfolio. How did you then kind of move into the niches that you did? Because you've done an array of property strategies. You've built a successful portfolio. Those figures are not insignificant figures, over 450 properties sourced. And we were talking before we hit record today, that's not just sourced, that's sourcing the properties, end-to-end service, managing the refurbs, putting the tenants in place, filling the properties with furniture, because you've got quite a few different demographics. How did you create a business around it from what is ultimately a very different background?
Yeah, it was quite simple. People started saying, can you do that for me? So I hopped on the education bandwagon. I found Progressive and signed up for whatever I could. I got on their PPA package as it was then, and a few of the training courses. And yeah, people were like, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, well, I've just been doing it by myself. And we grew, really quickly. And like anything, the first couple of years, I probably did 4 or 5 properties. Mm-hmm. And I was doing everything myself, refurbishing.
You'd done all the legwork.
Qualified as an electrician, a really rubbish electrician. Plastering, watching YouTube how to plaster, fitting the kitchens, all the stuff. And
so
then
fully immersed in it.
Yeah, massively. And then I was like, hang on a minute, I'll get some people in to help me. And that's where it grew.
And is that how property then changed your world? Because obviously from being in the military for 16 years, how did your life change as a result of that?
It's hard. It's not an easy industry to be in, and that's why I laughed when I said I had this dream of buying some houses and living off the rent. Yeah, absolutely. But
forgot the bit in the middle.
yeah. There's just so many external influences, so many factors. And I think it's just one part of an ecosystem. I grew a group of companies. One of the things was a byproduct of refurbishing a property. You put a tenant in. I need to. There's a letting agency. That's the byproduct. Yeah. So I was like, well, I'll try handing it out, didn't work. I'll try partnering with someone, didn't work, right, I'll bring it in-house. And that was kind of my mantra with all of it, that by having it in-house, it meant that I could control it, I could protect it. So it was an asset creation machine and then an asset protection machine.
Makes total sense. So actually, there's a lot of pull from what you'd done previously, I suppose, a lot of transferable skills that moved and got you into property. So it wasn't falling into it, you had an intention, you built a business around it, and I'm sure, you know, doing it for the duration of time that you have done, you have undoubtedly going to have had some big wins or some big challenges along the way. Tell us something out of that, a win or a challenge.
Probably one of the massive challenges was the first development I did. You know, it was a HMO that we're converting to full flats down in Brighton. I live in Leeds.
So remotely done as well?
Significantly remotely, and the numbers were like, ooh, we're going to make some money on this. And about 18 months later, because of builders and, you know, our fault, you know, I'm not going to blame anyone, it was down to me, but, you know, the contracts and the way it was set up and professional fees and you know, lenders, all the bits and bobs that are involved, I broke even.
Which actually is
it's
not
not
that
bad
thing when you hear
yeah.
some of the horror stories of people who aren't educated in those areas, because some of the things you're saying is the contracts and the contractors and the, you know, additional costs. Would it be fair to say that it was a kind of a lack of experience in that led to it being a challenge? Yeah,
a lack of, you know, I think one of the massive takeaways I've learned from all my time in business is having the right contract protects everything. And it had it all, but there were ways around it, and there were ways that, you know, you kind of like health and safety. You know, when someone trips over something, a policy comes in place and someone else doesn't, and that's the same. You learn as you go, don't you?
Absolutely. So you did say your first development. Although you broke even, which for a challenging development, breaking even is huge. It's a great thing, but obviously you've had some major successes there as well.
Yeah, well, the second one was worse than that. So
I'm going to go down.
that was a loss. Yeah, absolutely. Partnered with the wrong people within that kind of business, and that was a resounding loss. And then the third one actually was phenomenal, you know, a high six-figure payout.
Nice.
It was very, very good. I actually exited and got a payout partway through.
Nice. So you only got halfway through and still done it. So I think that the lesson, I suppose, for many people here is perseverance and continuing forward, because the point we've made here is, you know, you've moved from one to another, it didn't stop you. You know, that continually moving forward and consistency. So what niches did you then settle into, because you've done a lot of different property strategies and developments? Yeah,
I got really good at HMOs, and in the area in Yorkshire where I operate, you know, I found kind of nice spots where, you know, 4 to 7 bed. The biggest I've done is 28 bed HMO, but 4 to 7 beds HMOs. Yeah, and I tried different sectors and different markets, and for quite a long time I focused massively on the student sector. That was an area that the payment, it fitted the product and the market environment.
So timing as well as time served as a result of it. So one of the things that we did look at earlier on is just to give you some statistics around this. During 2021-2022, in the academic year, there were 2.2 million full-time and sandwich students within the UK, 2.2 million. Of those, almost 350,000 are occupying provider maintained property, but over 201 are in the private sector hall. So the largest share of that student accommodation, 2.2 million, is almost 600,000 occupied in other rented accommodation. So the type of properties that Nick is talking about there. So this is something that obviously has been around for a long while. You've been doing it for a long while, and there are undoubtedly going to be massive opportunities in this. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of got started, like why student accommodation? Yes, the location, but obviously there's many other sectors that you could have chosen. Why students?
So I can give you some stats as well if you want, because I remember them. The town I was operating in, 168,000 population, probably a little bit higher now, I suspect, and the students attending the university was 22,000 students, with about 11.5 to 12 requiring accommodation. And I did a really simple, you know, assessment of the area, going what accommodation, and there was enough there. But the interesting was the student halls where the first years were going was out of town, 30 minutes drive. So there was a bus going backwards and forwards. It wasn't my primary market first years, but The remainder of the stuff was, I would say, landlords that had done really well for a lot of years, the jumble sale kind of properties. And there's nothing, it's a strategy, but yeah, it was, as soon as I brought this funky IKEA furniture in, or even we got more bespoke stuff in, direct from manufacturer, decent furniture that would weather students. It really worked. That was the niche. I could make it look very good and at a decent cost.
And I think that's the key, isn't it? Having a good understanding of it, because a lot of people will look at the likes of student accommodation. I know that when I first started looking into property, the assumption was what you saw, the jumble sale. Mismatch. I got this out of the local skip. My aunt was giving this sofa away. Nothing matches. Everything's been thrown together. So you picked a bit of a niche in that way. Would you say it was kind of a boutique style, or was it just the calibre of the furniture, etc., and the decor brought in a different calibre of client?
So interesting. I think when you start with this stuff, you go, right, what do I like? And then actually the lesson is obviously you go, well, what's required? So when I started, it was either a lime green or a bright orange or a mustard wall.
Nice.
That was the feature, which I still think is not bad.
It worked.
But as soon as I employed a full-time interior designer within the company,
changed.
It was just, it was a game changer. Now that's the standard now.
Yeah.
But it wasn't then. Like having grey carpets and white walls and grey doors. That was not there.
Yeah, it was this back in the day when everything was like Coca-Cola coloured carpet and magnolia walls and
absolutely.
Whatever you can fit in.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that in mind, obviously one of the things that Nick's just been saying is the kind of bringing people in-house, the business setup, that's something that you've replicated in all different areas within property, but making sure that it's fit for purpose for the demographic, and just to look at those kind of students have changed. It's not back in the day when I went to university where anything went, they want really high quality, really good decor, fit for purpose. So UCAS predicts that the undergraduate student numbers are likely to continue increasing until 2030. So it's not that the boat has sailed, there is still a massive demand if we couple together those figures of nearly 600,000 in private rented accommodation. It does state that there are accommodation shortages according to UCAS. They are forecast to become more widespread, with students predicting a shortfall of 450,000 student beds by 2025, which is just a phenomenal figure. So with that in mind, if you are sitting there thinking, I'd love to get involved in student accommodation, student lets, what kind of top tips would you give to people getting started right now if they were to start out now with student accommodation?
Cool, great question. And I have prepared some top tips, which is
love it.
Handy, isn't it? I'm in the right place. First thing is having the right location. That I found that really, really important, because you don't want to be too close, but you don't want to be too far away, and you've got to think about what's around as well. Because quite often my target market, it wasn't the first years, it was the second, third years, mature students, postgraduates, perfect, because they kind of tend to look after the place a little bit more. But by having stuff in the right location, it meant it was full all the time.
Yeah.
So a gym, a Subway, a kind of little supermarket, something along the lines of that, maybe somewhere to socialise. I'm finding the change in student, people don't necessarily want to be in the city or the town centres. Yeah. They want to be on the fringes of it, so they can still have the lifestyle and the experience.
Best of both worlds. Okay. Yeah. Next top tip.
The student's needs, it's understanding exactly what's important to a student. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's kind of heat and shelter, and I would add Wi-Fi in there. Exceptional Wi-Fi is really, really important. You think about the space that's required, and balanced with, they're learning how to live by themselves quite often.
Yes.
So it's making it kind of relative to what kind of characters that will be there.
Yeah.
And you've got to think about the demographic of the students as well.
Absolutely, because there's not just one type of student. So the education in this part of it is knowing your area is absolutely vital, knowing what the needs are, and where are you getting this information from? How are people going to find that out? What
the needs, ask them, very simple. The student union's phenomenal, and they're normally really, really open to, you go in there and say, look, I'm looking to provide accommodation for your students. What do you need? Literally
find out what people want and give it to them, which sounds like the simplest thing, but if you're looking at student lets on the market right now and they're not letting, or they look dated, or they're shabby, or you're looking at where they are and the locations are wrong, done the right way, it can make you an absolute fortune, and it can be a really successful business and provide great homes for people, but it can be done incorrectly. So go on, give us another top tip.
Furnishing, really, really important. How you're furnishing, really simple example is our sofas were ply lined underneath, so if anyone jumped on them, they didn't just bounce through. Really, like 100 little things like that we learned over the years, stuff would last a lot longer. So we weren't paying top dollar for the kind of strongest, best, because we know it would.
You'd have a turnover of it anyway.
Yeah, stuff like having the router central rather than the front room. Stuff like enough plug sockets for everyone. Stuff like somewhere to hang your coats. Stuff really, really important. And also within the kind of furnishing, it's making sure that they've got everything they need, but you'll find over the years of having these properties that they kind of grow and adapt. It's like, where did that sofa come from, and why have I got a kind of 5 knife sets in the kitchen? Or
I suppose especially if you're looking at the second year and beyond market, people are accumulating their belongings as a result as well. So this is really important to note, because a lot of people might think they have to go in and furnish it, with absolutely everything, when again, speaking to the student union, speaking to the students themselves and finding out what it is that they need. Go on, give us one more top tip.
I would say, let's talk about the marketing, so how you fill the stuff. Lots of other bits and bobs within this, but the marketing I found really, really interesting. And the student union were fantastic, because I went into my local student union and said, we want to give the best accommodation you guys have got. Would you give us students? That was a really simple.
The best market.
And they've gone on to set up their own agency, and that they place themselves. And also, I looked at where the students were coming from, and so like I had a website which was translated to Chinese, because there was a lot of Chinese students in my area. I looked at local community areas that perhaps Polish students would migrate to, and had an in from that side.
So it was actually knowing your local area, knowing the demographics of people who would be moving there, the types of places that they shopped, etc., actually dictated where you marketed. Some really cool top tips there. I hope you're all listening to these. Now, obviously, there are going to be some challenges. What are the kind of biggest pitfalls that people need to avoid when looking at student accommodation, or those kinds of areas?
Obviously parties, because that's what students want to do, which is absolutely fine. It's part of the rite of passage, but it's about being respectful of the properties, being respectful of your neighbours, and making sure that the boundaries are in place. I learnt very quickly by having the parents' contact details, worked really, really powerfully.
Little bit of a deterrent for people. Can I ask then, does that come down to your contract? So if we kind of replicate this, where you're talking about the success you've had in loads of different areas in business, would that be based on the conversations with them when you're vetting the tenants, discussing with them, getting the parents' details, effectively like a guarantor? If you're naughty, I'm going to tell mum and dad. Would it be fair to say that that's kind of something that was a learned process from watching other people struggle, or from having challenges yourself in that area, and just each time making the process more robust?
100%. And the contracts that we had, constantly evolve. Like the challenge right now is the cost of utility bills, and if it gets too hot in a property with the heating on, the window will be opened rather than turn the heating down. So we've got to put all sorts of little measures, and it's not about we want people to be warm and safe and comfortable, but also it's got to be win-win. And having the right paperwork in place, and you've got to be conscious, like with student accommodation, the financials are interesting, because they tend to be paid out of the student payouts, which are 3 times a year rather than monthly payouts. There tends to be a gap in the summer, and it's whether you want someone enters a contract for that, or you just say, I'm going to take the hit, which we do, because I think that's a fairer way of doing it. But also, if there's maintenance, it needs paying for.
You've got an opportunity to get it done as well. So with that being said, now is, a lot of people will say, your properties have got to be filled. I know we were talking earlier on about filling them kind of 9 months in advance, but if there are people right now who have student accommodation, student let, and it's not yet full, what advice would you give to those people now?
Within every area, there are specialist letting agents that have, books of people looking for accommodation. You'll find people in dribs and drabs. There's also an intake in January, because most universities have, the second intake. You'll find people in dribs and drabs, or perhaps they're in a group and they've fallen out and they're looking for others. So advertising on spare room, advertising on student accommodation website, so the digital portals. And then, like I've said before, go to the uni.
Go to the uni itself, direct to source.
Yeah.
So is now a good time then to start, because you're talking about a January intake, so you could start looking at getting your student HMOs. You're planning ahead, if you're looking 9 months in advance. So we're probably looking at, although it's seasonal, the entire year round is potentially a good time to do this. So if people are wanting to get started, is now a good time?
I think that you're going to get stragglers at the moment. Most of the groups will have already chosen their properties quite a few months ago. There'll still be individuals that will be perhaps falling out with their mates, or perhaps they'll
gone in through clearing.
A late addition to university or something like that. There's also an intake in January, which a lot of universities have a much smaller intake, but that's you're still going to get individuals at that point. When we're looking at letting the properties on a whole, we probably start looking January, February to let for the kind of August, September kind of intake.
Planning ahead, this is really useful information, by the way, because if you're planning ahead, by the time if you're looking at properties, which we're seeing some changes within the market, inflation's affecting it, all of those different things, there's going to be opportunities. By the time you've purchased, gone through conveyancing, done the refurb, especially if it's a 3 or 4 bed house that you're converting into a HMO, you could have these ready and rearing to go to hit that January market. Now, this has been short and sweet, and I've still got a ton of questions that I'd love to ask of Nick. If you have any more questions that you want to ask of Nick, you want to know more about student let, you've got questions that we've not yet answered, you want to know about his development, you want to know how good or bad he was as an electrician. If you want to know anything about that, put it into the comments. What have you enjoyed? What do you want to know more of? And if it's all right with you, we'll harass you to come back.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
In the meantime, though, if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, whether that's kind of privately or through Progressive Property, what's the best way to get hold of you?
So I've got a very comprehensive one-paragraph website, which is www.nickthorpe.me, and then also social media, Nick Thorpe, look like this, and my photo looks like this. So
we'll put that into the comments for you as well, so you can get hold of Nick. I'm sure he's going to be absolutely inundated. Now, if you have enjoyed anything that we've shared with Nick, all of the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to ensure that you're notified. If you want more information, you've got specific questions that you want Nick to answer, he's got a wealth of experience, put them into the comments below, and we will see you next time.